Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today. Hello again, listener, and welcome along to episode 23 of the podcast. Today's topic is the NPI process, that's new product introduction. So we're going to go into more detail with Renaud about how the NPI process can help you to reduce risks throughout the production of a new product, the benefits of using a more structured NPI approach, and the anatomy of the process. So we'll start with the product specifications and go all the way through to mass production. Let's get started with Renaud.
Hi, Renaud.
Hey, Adrian. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Now, in the last podcast where we spoke about process audits, we did mention the role of NPI, or new product development, if you like, in reducing risks. So in this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about that. And let's just start off, though, by talking about the NPI process as a whole, so the listener can get a good, well-rounded understanding of what that is. So could you explain what the process is and maybe its makeup?
Well, at a very high level, let's say it this way. Let's say you want to make a new product, but it involves, designing the product. It involves, anything that has to be done to get it on the market, basically, or through maybe prototyping, maybe making some tooling, testing it and refining it, and certifications and so on and so forth, until it's ready to be put in production and put on the market. This is very wide, and people who have not done it, or even people who've been doing it for 10 or 20 years, they say, wow, this is a really, really blurry process. You can't really make it as a process, because it's always, exploratory. It's do something, we try something, and then we see if it's good, or if it's the wrong direction, we go another direction, and there's so many iterations and going left and right. How can you make it into a process, right? And actually going at it this way, with this kind of thinking, is part right. Yes, there needs to be a lot of flexibility, but it's also part wrong. There should be a plan to, let's say there should be some stages with different approvals. Otherwise, you from a budget point of view, obviously, you don't want to keep pouring money into something without ever having any sign that it's going to be successful on the market and it's manufacturable and everything. But beyond that, to make sure that you're designing and developing something that can be made at the right quality level, that can be made at the right volume, that can be made at the right cost. This is really important. If you go at it without any without a process, at least you have to do this and you have to do this, and you should not forget to do that before you go there, and so on. Then it's kind of freewheeling. I mean, it's really dangerous. It's really dangerous. So a lot of people go into R&D. So you want to make a new product. I don't know, say something. I don't know, a new kind of of microphone, or I don't know, whatever. Let's say microphone. You say, oh yeah, for that kind of application and with that kind of design, oh, it would be really nice at that price point, roughly. So you do a little bit of market research. You talk to potential customers and so on. Okay, and what is between this and maybe 6 months later, maybe 1 year later, it goes into production? There might be a lot of things. If it's really an entirely new product, it's going to be some R&D involved, right? Product R&D, But a lot of people make the big mistake, and we see that all the time. They come to China, to Vietnam, to manufacturers, and they say, okay, hey, I've made some prototypes, or I've paid a design firm to make prototypes, or please make prototypes for me. And then once I approve the prototype, it's basically ready to go into production. This is maybe the single greatest mistake that companies make when they're developing their new product. You don't go from prototype to full, to mass production. It's extremely risky. A lot of issues would come up. So you're sort of leaving it to the manufacturer to fill the gaps here. But the more unique and the more complex the product, the more gaps there are. Okay, and in the last episode, I said in a process audit, if you really want to dig, you're going to look at the NPI process of the manufacturer, because good manufacturers will have solid NPI processes. And yeah, right, the buyer might not know what's going on behind the curtain, but they are going to do a number of things. And maybe if it's really a complex new product, it might take them, a month and a half, 2 months, maybe more to get things organized, and there's some tooling and complex certifications and so on. It might be 3 months. Who knows? Depending really again on the type of product, there might be a lot of work, right? So, and sometimes longer actually. So if really there's a lot of process engineering involved. So the problem is, I said something of good factories. The problem is most factories here don't have this level of sophistication, don't have the maturity of actually telling you, hey, we know from experience that we have to do this, and we have a process for that, and so on. No, most factories, and I really mean, 98% of them will say, well, prototype, okay, approved, okay, next step is to purchase the components, send us the advance payment. It's approved, right? So send us the money. And they try to get that and to get moving in the direction of producing and getting paid, because hey, that's how they make money, right? And they tend to be over optimistic. I mean, something that I probably mentioned already many times on this podcast, but they tend to be too optimistic, and they tend to really not look at the downsides, but just they try to go fast. So at a very high level, that's what companies, typically in electronics, they would call it NPI process. And we have a nice resource on our website, on sofeast.com, about that. If you search NPI process. In other industries, it's a bit different. So I'm not really going to go into that. In the car industry, they have the APQP on the supplier side, or PPAP on the buyer side. It's a set of approvals. It's very, very, very structured. In the toys industry, they have a little bit of their own process, and so on and so forth, right? But what you asked also, what is it made of? Well, if you think again in terms of process stages and deliverables, outputs of the process, and validations, confirmation that it's okay, and we can go to the next stage. Basically, at the beginning, you need to document what is required, right? What are the specifications? What are the requirements? What is this product actually supposed to do? Not in a very subjective and and poetic way, but in a very down-to-earth, measurable manner as much as possible, right? Not everything might be measurable, but it needs to be very clear, right? So that you can give a brief to the designers, you can give that to engineers, they would translate that into a testing plan, and so on. And spend a little bit of time thinking about that, because if you overlook some important requirements later might be too late. So let's come back to the example of the microphone. If for some reason, let's say the microphone is going to be used a lot by kids and is going to be dropped on the floor a lot, well, that's something that absolutely has to be to be mentioned right there, to be documented. Okay, because otherwise, you design the structure, you do the mechanical design, you pick materials and so on, and then you deep into prototyping when you say, oh, by the way, how about if we drop it on the floor like 10 times from 1.3 meter high, and then it breaks too easily, and then oof, we have a lot of work still to do, right? So that will be phase one. Phase two, especially for relatively complex and unique products, it's a bit too ambitious to jump straight to doing the design that will be used in production and going for prototypes that will look good and have some functionality. It's a little bit too fast. There might be a need for a feasibility study on some of the assumptions that are really unknown, or a very rough kind of prototype. People often call it proof of concept. And the idea here, well, sometimes people, especially with electronic products, they want something that actually can't really be made, and they have an idea of how it's going to work, but they're not really sure. They have never seen anything like that working. So in some cases, it's better to go fast, to get an Arduino kit or Raspberry Pi, some of these very simple, easy to program sort of controllers, and to use that with some, maybe some other materials, not the exact materials that you want in the final product. Put it together, do a little bit of soldering and assembly, and a bit of programming on the Arduino, for example, and have something that actually works, that actually does the function that's required, right? At the same time, that's the good time to think of what materials, what technologies, starting to think of the supply chain side, what kind of suppliers to line up, and starting to maybe select a few critical components, and so on and so forth. Actually, a lot of changes can be made to the initial design at this phase. So this is a sort of an intermediary phase for going more, deeper into the design earlier, and testing a little bit, getting some feedback and making iterations. And after that is the proper prototyping phase. So this is usually whether it's a design firm or manufacturer, or the idea is to say, okay, this is going to be the material we use, this is going to be technology, this is going to be the components, and we try to get as close as possible to the final product, with the right look and the right functions. Now, if it's a simple product, one prototype in one go might be okay. If it's really a complex product, some iterations. So that's the reality. And if you don't plan for it, if you don't budget it, in terms of time and money, you might be really surprised here. Okay. At the same time, as you do that, you try to qualify the suppliers, and you try to source the components used for the prototype from the suppliers that can actually do a good job in mass production, right? So you're buying maybe 3 pieces, 5 pieces, 10 pieces from them, but you need to make sure that if once it's in production, they get to be able to make 10,000 pieces at a good quality level. You want to make sure that they're actually capable of doing that. And that's where, for the critical components, it makes sense to do relatively in-depth audits, such as process audits, right? That will be part of the NPI process. All of that really together is part of that overall process. Then let's say you get to a final prototype and it's approved, but maybe your mic has a sort of an enclosure for the bottom and middle part that's supposed to be in a plastic, but you're not going to make the tooling for plastic injection molding just to get to a prototype for approval, right? So this is going to be maybe 3D printed, maybe it's going to be machined out of a sort of a block of plastic, right? CNC'd out. So you approve a prototype that looks like what production should be, but everybody knows we're not there yet, right? There's going to be a little bit of a difference because the production process is going to be completely different for that component of the product. So the next phase in that case is really to work on the tooling, right? And for plastic injection molding, because it's probably the most common type of process that that is used in so many different products and that calls for relatively expensive tooling. Well, you get a budget roughly 1 month to get the molds made. Plus, there's nearly always some adjustments to make, and it's not going to be $200. It really depends on the size of the part, but very fast, it gets to $5,000, $10,000. And in some cases, and especially if there's a number of parts that have to be custom made, custom with your own design, your own shape, it can be over $100,000. Really, and the kind of steel that you pick will have a direct impact on that, because the harder the steel, well, the better the mold. I mean, you can maybe make 500,000 shots with it or more, but it's going to cost more because it takes much longer to machine with cutting tools that are also themselves more expensive and so on, right?
Before you go on to the next phase, this is quite timely because you've just written a blog post on qualityinspection.org, which is about that gap between when you go from a prototype to actually taking the plunge and investing in the tooling, which, as you said, is quite expensive. So I will add the link to that in the show notes. And also we have produced information about steel on Sofeast.com as well. So I will give a link to some videos or some information about that too.
That's right. A lot of resources about the different grades of steel and also about the plastic injection molding process and about some of the most common types of thermoplastics. And all of that is available for free, I mean, even on YouTube, actually. So obviously the end of that phase of tooling is to get some first samples, first trial shots, out of tooling and check them up. And then once they are okay, to sign off on them, okay? Right after that, the company that will do the fabrication, so typically, again, to get back to plastic injection molding as an example, the plastic injection molding process, that work might be done by a plastic part supplier, but the mold might be fabricated somewhere else. Okay, so once they accept the mold and there's a confirmation that the parts coming out of it are acceptable, have them make a small series of pieces, maybe 50 pieces or so, and use that with all the knowledge that you get from the prototyping phase. And obviously you need to buy also a small batch of the other components, and you're going to do a pilot run with them, ideally. That's really very good for catching the issues that are likely to impact mass production, that have a direct impact on quality, on delays and cost overruns and so on. Ideally you make a pilot run with them, you assemble them, and these first pieces that are really the first pieces that you have out of the tooling with all the parts that will be the same as mass production, you can use them for some reliability testing. You can use them for some compliance testing, for some certifications, if there is a need for certifications for your product. And obviously, you during the assembly pilot run, you have a look at what's going on, what are the difficulties, what are the common defects, and so on, and you think of how to improve the process. And at the same time, you might find that maybe the one of the suppliers, maybe the cable supplier or the metal mesh supplier, really did a terrible job. Maybe the metal mesh supplier, when they did powder coating and is terrible. The aesthetic effect is terrible. Well, that's you know that before you purchase maybe 10,000 pieces. You noticed it on the first 50 pieces. Now, obviously, not all suppliers accept to do that, and that's something to negotiate from the start. But a small run like this is so helpful, right? And at the same time, you would define the processes, the manufacturing processes in a bit more detail. Maybe put together do a risk analysis, a process FMEA before, and then refine it during that pilot. Maybe put together a control plan, a process control plan, which is so helpful to really think of what are the critical steps, what to do, how to confirm that it's running the right way, and so on. And based on that, obviously the work instructions for the operators, right? As well as do the final confirmations of some samples for quality that can be used as the quality standard, right? In the factory, but also for the customer, right? So all of this is sort of linked. It's really helpful to do it this way. And that would be, phase 5, the pilot run, and maybe compliance testing, reliability testing, and so on. And then obviously this goes directly into production, right? So ordering the mass production quantities, and it's then all about applying the what was planned before, and keep improving, keep seeing, okay, oh, we have an issue here, okay, how to fix it so it doesn't come back. We have an issue here again and again. And maybe most of the issues will come from the component suppliers, maybe they will come from that assembly work. You just need to see what comes up and work at it. For a new product, there's no silver bullet, especially if it's a complex new product. There's always going to be issues. So that's sort of an overview of what the NPI process would look like in general for electromechanical products, right?
Yeah, very, very helpful. I think for any importers who are sort of more new to the process, getting that kind of anatomy, it really helps you to visualize the, how to get started the right way and even end up with mass production, using best practices. So yeah, that's really, really helpful. I did have another question about it though. There's clearly a lot of benefits to having a process like this, but does it always make sense for producers of every product type to use such an NPI process, which is potentially quite detailed and requires a bit of work along the way?
Right. The main criterion to look at is the expected volume, the risk, because all of this is really reducing the risk. All right. I mean, in the early phases, it's about reducing the risk of going in the wrong direction in next phases. But really, when you look at it entirely, it's about reducing the risk of things going wrong in production. Okay. So if you are going to first, maybe you just want a little batch, maybe 500 pieces of your microphone, then you're going to try to reuse as many standard components as possible. You're going to try to keep things simple, less costly, probably. And you're not going to be so concerned about checking and double checking and triple checking in every way we can, what can go wrong. Because the very worst thing that can happen is that, the 500 microphones might have to be thrown away. That's not millions of dollars, right? So maybe it's more important for you to get to market fast, take some risks, and maybe 20% of the microphones have an issue, they fail end of line testing. Well, maybe these 20% they put aside, they will be reworked later. Already you have 80% ready to sell, and again, maybe it's more important for you to go fast to market and to get some feedback, to maybe iterate on for your next version of the product, or who knows, right? Now, if you are, I don't know, if you are Volkswagen and you plan your next sedan, your next next model, and you have plans to make at least 600,000 cars of that model at least, and maybe 1 million. Okay, are you going to just rush into production and take a lot of risks? Definitely not. When you make a car and you just putting it through all the crash tests and the market validation tests in a number of countries, just that is extremely expensive. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And sure. If you change just one part in your car, so let's say your car has 5,000 parts, you change just one part, in theory you have to redo all of these approvals, right? So you really want to work with suppliers that are really solid, and you want to make sure that all the engineering that will reduce the risks for production is done properly, right? So they go deeper than what I mentioned here, right? They qualify the measurement system of the supplier just to make sure that there's no that they can trust the data that the manufacturer collects. They try to really think of maybe the checking fixtures and other things like that, and go gauges and mistake proofing, and they require some statistical process control, and so on and so on and so forth. So it goes deeper than what I mentioned, but that's sort of the extreme example, right? Now, for the average company, actually I don't know what average company would be, but if you have a budget of maybe $500,000 to do the design and development of the new product, and there's some electronic parts or some mechanical parts, it's going to be more or less what I described before, right? And a lot of companies don't really know what to expect of sales, but I mean, they've got to have some kind of objective, right? Otherwise, why would they confirm, okay, let's go ahead with design, and let's go ahead with this, let's go ahead with this. I mean, it's a big budget, fairly quickly. So you need to have some assumptions about where you're going. And the more money you put into it, the more it hurts if it goes wrong. So the more it makes sense to spend the extra money to do the right things, to have these 3, 4, 5 steps, to to go a little bit slower, to do things in a more organized way, more systematic way, and to be much more confident when the time comes for production. Because if you make some big mistakes, you skip some steps that you should not skip, you take unreasonable risks, it can be extremely painful once it reaches production. because they're going to start assembling. They're going to say, well, a lot of them don't work, and then the company that does, I don't know, the plating, or that does the whatever, one of the upstream processes, their process is not mature, but you didn't know about that, and then they say, well, there's 40% rejects, we have to do ×2 on the cost, and you're like, whoa. And maybe the ×2 on the cost of that component pushes everything so high that all of a sudden it's impossible for you to make money with that product on the market, right? So, or things just stall, or you have enormous quality problems. Half of the products don't pass. Well, what do you do? Maybe you already sold most of your quantity to a big customer, and now you see that you cannot deliver to them. And all of this, it's all linked. Quality issues lead to delivery issues and to cost issues. So you need to be clear about what kind of balance do you want to achieve here, what kind of trade-off, and plan accordingly, basically.
Well, I suppose all of this becomes all the more relevant when we look at it in the context of China, because as you've said before in different podcasts and on different material that we've put out, often a Chinese supplier will actually be rushing to get to mass production because that's in their interests. But that's actually contrary to exactly what you've just been talking about.
That's so true. I mean, it's not their incentives. Again, I might already have said that before, but really look at the incentives. And if you let the supplier choose, what they're going to do, and you trust their experience and so on, incentives would drive behavior. Their incentive is to get the money as fast as possible, to ship the goods to you as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, sorry. So, but what are they going to do? Are they going to slow down, put some engineers on this, press their own suppliers to make a small batch, which usually they hate, make a small batch on their assembly shop floor, which usually they hate, and so on. You do some extra testing for reliability just to confirm that the design itself doesn't come with serious weaknesses. I mean, do you really think they're going to do that? Well, the very good ones, yes, because they want everything that goes into production to be smooth, and it's their policy, and they would do it. But that's a very small minority, very small.
Yeah. But I think we can all agree that the more that you know about the Chinese, the more that their attitude is quite positive in terms of being a sort of can-do go spirit. Like let's get working, let's get it done. But sometimes as product complexity goes up, as the need for safety goes up, as the money that you're investing is increased, that the need for this methodical approach is all the more necessary. So, and I guess that's where maybe getting this kind of thing into your manufacturing contracts with your supplier becomes quite important as well.
Yes, that's more on the business side, and everything we've been discussing so far is more on the, I don't know, the technical side, let's say. Of course, I mean, manufacturing agreements help in making it clear, what is expected. So if you say that you have a certain process in the development of the product, and you expect such stages to be followed, and you expect the supplier to provide such deliverables, and you make it clear, what you're going to pay or what. Well, that's more the development agreement, right? That's not really about the manufacturing agreement, but that is good to have an idea about that, to plan for it. And usually if you require all that, then you have to pay for it. So development services basically from the supplier. And this is much more typical with contract manufacturers than OEM suppliers, and ODM suppliers even more rare. So in the impact on the manufacturing agreement is basically to keep the costs with the supplier, right? And so yeah, okay, you're really late in delivering, you have these penalties. Oh, there's these quality issues, this is what's going to happen. It's not going to look nice for on your side, it's going to be costly. Then they take it a little bit more seriously. However, does it mean that they will plan to follow a good NPI process? Not really. In my experience, not really. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough to scare them, to push them to do things as I described, because in many cases they've never done it, or they've never really understood the ins and outs of it. So, sometimes buyers find a supplier that says, "Oh, look, I work for such and such company," and the buyer's like, "Whoa, really?" And let's assume it's true. Does it mean that the buyer can just say, "Okay, yeah, can you make that for me? Okay, what's the price? Okay, just tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you, and go ahead into production, ship it to me." Is that enough? Of course not. Very often, these big famous companies might work with a manufacturer, but they guide the manufacturer, they control the manufacturer, they do all kinds of things. They take the NPI process in their hands. They do it, and they have one or two engineers maybe at the factory that know how to do the individual tasks, most of them, and they do it just because they are forced to do it. And the next supplier comes in and say, "Oh, great, okay, I just trust your process, do whatever you do usually." The supplier is not going to do exactly the same thing as for Microsoft. I mean, forget about it. Either they are a good supplier. Okay, if they work for Microsoft, they're probably not a bad supplier to begin with. But there's so many brands out there. Some of these brands work with pretty average factories, but they have dedicated lines. They have all sorts of approval processes to get to the quality that they need. And Joe Blow, the buyer who comes out there and says, "Okay, I want you to make this product for me," is not going to benefit from all that.
Right.
Just because the manufacturer does all these extra processes only when they are forced to do it. That's the sad truth about it.
At the top of the podcast, I mentioned the relationship between NPI and quality. So just to bring it back to quality just before we end, and I know you might be reiterating a few of the points that you've already made, but exactly what can a buyer expect from implementing an NPI process, a little bit like what we've been talking about already, and its impact on quality?
Well, they can expect a clear standard, a clear set of requirements, that altogether, let's call it the quality standard, okay, to be agreed on with the supplier. That's extremely important. They can expect a product design, if they design the product from scratch, a product design that itself carries less risk, because hopefully there are design reviews and people think, well, what about this, what about that? People maybe tested different things, maybe several materials, pick the better one, and so on. The design itself might lead to fewer issues. The manufacturing process will certainly lead to fewer issues because there's been so many steps, from simple risk analysis to really, planning it and doing it on a small scale and improving, and so on. And same thing for the component suppliers, right? So they can expect the manufacturing process to be much more sound and solid, right? They can expect production to be much more consistent, much closer to the golden standard that they approved. On the quality side, fewer design defects, fewer manufacturing defects, a clear standard. What else do you want, right?
Sure.
Better qualified component suppliers. Yeah, that's good testing stations in place. By the time assembly is launched, all of this is very important.
Food for thought there. Great. That's a really good insight into the NPI process. Thanks, Renaud. I think we'll call it a day there.
All right, cool. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.